All right, thank you all for coming. Today I'm going to talk about preparing blockchains for the post-quantum era. I think it's a talk that applies to pretty much any blockchain, but of course I'm going to be focused on the transition for the Tezos blockchain, though I would say that the lessons are broadly applicable. My name is Arthur Breitman. I'm a co-founder of the Tezos protocol. I'm also a director at Tech, which is an entity in the Tezos ecosystem that helps the promotion and growth of the Tezos network. So the main message, I'm going to give you my conclusion in the first slide, which is that quantum readiness is a process, not a switch. It's a process that takes time, which is why you should start now. The urgency doesn't come from the fact that tomorrow we're going to wake up and elliptic curve signatures are going to be broken, but you need time for your users. So yes, I would like to emphasize that I don't think there's an acute threat today, but the date at which there will be an acute threat comes closer and closer every day. I'm sure you've seen the papers from Google recently where they have the number of qubits necessary. We're not there. I also don't think we'll be there in 2029, but it's also not impossible that we'll be there in 2029. And so it's appropriate to take the right measures. Why? Because being early has very few downsides, and being late can cause severe disruption. The other point I'm going to make is there is really no reason not to do it. So let's look a little bit at the quantum vulnerable components you have in Tezos. And if you are looking at crypto, sometimes it can be confusing what's vulnerable, what's not vulnerable. And the short rule of thumb is if it uses abelian groups, which are the commutative groups, so anything that has to do with factorization, with elliptic curves, with DSA, all of that is going to be vulnerable, and everything that relies on hashes and other things which don't have this nice abelian group structure in general, I'm simplifying, but in general, is going to be resistant. You might have to double your key size because you can get a square root advantage on these algorithms, but by and large, you're fine. So what do we have? Well, we have the account signatures, of course. We use different keys in the Tezos network. TZ1s are based on ED25519. That's, all of these are elliptic curves. And of course, they are vulnerable, including also BLS, which use pairing signatures. That is also vulnerable. Then we have aggregated attestations. It's fairly new, but so now in the Tezos protocol, when the bakers participate and they vote on a block, as part of, that's what they do in proof of stake, we can aggregate the signature into a single signature. This is really for efficiency, and this uses BLS. We have the data availability layer KZG commitments. So that uses KZG proofs over BLS 12381. So that's also pairing cryptography. Also vulnerable. Data availability layer is essentially what gives you data availability sampling or sharding. It lets you have a lot of data for your execution environment and rollups without having to overload the layer 1. We use class group VDF for randomness. So there's different sources of randomness, we'll see. But the class group VDF also relies on a abelian group structure. And then we have some smart contract primitives which are available for smart contract developers, like an integration of the sampling protocol for privacy-preserving transactions. We have direct access to ROT16, BLS. We have time lock primitives for people who want to bring contracts which are secure against MEV. So all of these primitives are dependent on some quantum vulnerable component. And so what is to be done? Well, really, they fall into two categories. One is user keys, and the other one is protocol cryptography. And for user keys, the technical difficulty is very low, but the social difficulty is very high. For protocol cryptography, the technical difficulty is high, but the social difficulty is very low. So what do I mean by either? Well, technical difficulty is you're going to need to write code. You're going to need to assess different algorithms, pick one, implement it, deploy it. That's the technical difficulty. The social difficulty is actually getting adoption. And so for user keys, well, it turns out that they are post-quantum signatures, schema variables. There's many to choose from. They're fine. They're not as efficient as elliptic curve signatures, but they're fine. And it's fairly straightforward to integrate them. It's not a big job. However, the social difficulty is very high because you have a lot of users who are very passive. They hold some coins. They just want to keep holding their coins. They don't want to migrate to new keys. And these users are going to need some time to migrate. They're going to need the time to actually go and attach new keys and to essentially stop being vulnerable to a compromise of elliptic curve keys. That can take years. There are people who take actions on a network every couple of years. They don't pay attention. They don't want to pay attention. They shouldn't have to pay attention. But this is a really big one-off. This is a transition from classical computers to quantum computers. A little bit of user activity can be required and should be expected here. So this is why we need to act now, because this takes a long time. Now, the protocol cryptography, that is technically much harder, and we'll see how we can mitigate them. But the social difficulty is fairly low, especially on a blockchain like Tezos, which has on-chain governance. The reason primarily is that the people who validate the network, operate nodes, are pretty reactive. They know what's going on. They're online. They pay attention to the network. So if you contact them and you say, hey, it's time, and if you have a protocol proposal to make your protocol quantum resistant, you can do this. You can do this in a matter of months in terms of not the implementation itself, but the going into production can happen in a matter of months. If you had to do it in an absolute emergency, you could probably do it in days, but the technical difficulty is very high. So now, what are we going to do? So now, the path is to first introduce a scheme for post-quantum signatures for your users. And that you should start right now, because this is a process that will never finish. This is a process that will take years. I do not know when quantum computers will be there, but I do know that when they are here, there will be some users who will say, oh, I forgot to migrate. They will exist. And you're not, the choice right now is not whether or not they will exist, it's just how small of a fraction they are going to be. And then in the near term, you start working with wallet and tooling ecosystem to make sure that they adapt. During this period, this is when you have your user migration. And in long term, you start replacing the primitive of the protocols. You have a bit more time. It's more technically challenging, but you have more time to do it. You can think about it. You can think about the right approach. You can test it. You can implement it, knowing that if and when you need to pull the switch, you can do it fairly quickly. And again, I think quantum is coming much faster than we thought it was going to come 2 years ago, but it's also not coming tomorrow. So user key migration. Here are some candidates we looked at for post-quantum signatures for account keys. So all of these are basically lattice-based. When NIST was standardizing signatures, I really loved the oil and vinegar signatures for their unbalanced oil and vinegar signatures for the characteristics. Unfortunately, they proved to be insecure. But lattice has been fairly well tested since the 90s. Your options are MLDSA44, which is the most standardized one, is dilithium. Standardized as well, but a bit newer, is Falcon 512, and more experimental is Hawk 512. And the factors you look at when you pick the signatures are signature size and verification time and tooling compatibility. Not listed here are with a category of signature which I think are very important and very useful, which are the hash-based signatures like the Sphinx scheme. They are a very conservative choice. It's what I would recommend for a network like Bitcoin, which wants to be extremely conservative in their choices, and it would be easy and uncontroversial because you won't have long debate about their security, but the validation time for them is not very attractive. So here's a table to look at. Practical constraints for account key. So I listed on the left some schemes. So TZ1, which is the ED 25519 curve. And the other curve are similar in speed. MLDSA44, Falcon 512, Hawk 512, and then we also have those hash-based signatures I was mentioning, such as SHL-DSA 120F, 128F, and SHL-DSA 128S. So client side is quite a red herring because you care as a blockchain about the verification time, not so much the signing time. And the reason is, well, people can sign on their own hardware. Everyone needs to validate the signature, so and needs to validate a lot of signatures, but as a user, you're only responsible for making your own signature. So you should pay attention to how long it takes, because some people will have lots of signatures to make, but by and large, you're kind of like naturally distributed. So you will see that it's very, very fast for elliptic curve. It's pretty much as fast for MLDSA44, a bit slower for Falcon, very fast for Hawk, and then like quite slow for the hash-based signatures. But again, it's client-side, so we don't care as much. Public key size, it's a bit relevant because your public key is going to have to live on the blockchain, but it can be long-lived. You reveal it once, you publish it on the chain once, and then it lives there. So you should pay attention to it. Like, you don't want a public key that's in a gigabyte, but it's not that important. And as we can see, they're fairly small anyway. Like the biggest one we have here is only 1.3 kilobytes, which is MLDSA. So that's fine. Now, what's really important, I would say, is signature size and verification time. Signature size, because you're going to be pushing a lot of these signatures on your network, and verification time because, well, your validators have to verify them. Now, when you look at the verification time, the elliptic curve and the lattice signatures, you'll see that the lattice signatures are actually more competitive than the elliptic curve. That's great news. We're not going to spend a lot of time verifying those signatures. It would be very slow if you use the hash-based signatures, unfortunately, and that can be a reason to discount them. Although I will say that signature verification is the thing that validators can do in parallel, as opposed to executing transactions. So if most of your bottleneck is I/O and just like sequentially executing contract, and you can offload the signature verification to parallel CPUs, then the hash-based signatures can be a good choice. But then you also have signature size. You'll see there's an advantage to using signatures like Falcon and Hawk. They get quite smaller than MLDSA, about 4 times smaller, still about 10 times bigger than elliptic curve signatures. So it's a bit annoying, but I think you can live with it. And then, of course, the hash-based signatures can be much larger. So in like 17 kilobytes, in one case 8 kilobytes, and you have different trade-offs where you can make them a bit smaller, but at the end of the day, they're still chunky. And finally, you have HSM support, and that's just a very pragmatic aspect. You're going to have a lot of validators on your network who are going to need to see those signatures, and it may help them to have support in HSM for making the signatures, validating signatures, doing all of that. And this is where adopting standards is good, because if it's a NIST standard, hardware manufacturers will implement it. And if it's a standard that was concocted together on forums with a lot of like blockchains people, it might be better, but it might not be supported by hardware. And that was one of the reasons to go with MLDSA over Falcon and Hawk, which have better characteristic, which is that it's more likely to have initially HSM support compared to the other two. So how does this work? On Tezos, we are going to have a hybrid migration period. In the current protocol proposal, we're just introducing behind a feature flag the MLDSA44 signature, fairly easy. Then the transition period is when on an account you can have both a elliptic curve key and a post-quantum signature key. And bear in mind, you do not actually need to be doing post-quantum signatures right now. All you need to do is to make sure that your users have one as a backup, so that you can have a ripcord, and if and when there's clear and present danger, you pull the ripcord, you deprecate all of the elliptic curve signatures on your network, and then your users are not stuck. Why? Because they have a post-quantum key. So there's a cost. Those post-quantum signatures, they have bulkier signature sizes, but you don't actually need to use them. You don't need to use them. You don't want to use them right now. You just want your users to be able to have them. So that's a deprecation period where PQ becomes primary and EC is valid and still discouraged. And then in validation, there's clearly and prevent threat. An arbitrary threshold is whenever you see 64 bits EC being broken, I think you need to pull the ripcord and not have any EC signatures on your chain. And then finally, you can have a rescue period. And a rescue period is you say, well, okay, we blocked your account. If you can prove that your public key was derived from a seed phrase that then we'll let you unlock this. That can work as a signature. You can do this with a Stark. That's more implementation. And also, I wouldn't do it from the get-go, because if you do it from the get-go, people are going to say, oh, I'm fine. I'll just use the rescue mode. So, explicitly, I think in the roadmap, you want to have the rescue mode come later so that there's a bit of a penalty for waiting to do things. Stateful addresses as a migration enabler. So what we're doing is that instead of treating externally owned accounts, which we call implicit keys on Tezos, as just a hash of a public key, we treat them as a stateful address, so you can add multiple keys on one account. That lets you do a lot of things. It lets you do key rotation without changing identity. I know that in principle it would be great if we were all using domains as identity and then just changing the keys, but that's not how the ecosystem has evolved. People like keys, and so I think we have to deal with the fact that keys are handles, and so just make them handles and attach different keys to them instead of making them public key hash. That provides for ad hoc migration, and it also gives you a nice pathway to effective account migration. I don't have much time left. I'm just going to go quickly over the protocol level cryptography. That's more Tezos specific, but if I have one lesson on the first part is that do it now. There's really no cost in letting your users attach these keys, but it's not enough to tell, oh, well, the users have the possibility to do that. You see, they can use this smart contract or that smart contract. There need to be a push because you're facing very passive users sometimes. They're not going to do anything on their own. They're not going to protect themselves. And yes, it needs to come from, the ecosystem entities around a network needs to actually push this if they want to make it happen. So hard problem number one, aggregated attestations after BLS. BLS is fantastic for aggregating block signatures. Today we do this. How do we do it in the future? There's two options. With lattice signatures, there's some experimental aggregation of lattice signatures, or you can just say, oh, whatever, I'll just do a big Stark out of all of this. Starks have big signature sizes, but that's not a problem because you would just have a single one for all the signatures. Computation cost is a bit of an issue, but what can you do? There's not that many options. So, not having that many options in a way is not bad because it can guide you. You don't have to agonize over your choice anyway. Hard problem number two, doing the data availability layer without KZG pairing. That one is a little bit better. You can use fry-based commitments instead of those KZGs. You can do lattice commitments. You can try to use Starks. I like the fry-based commitment for this because it kind of like mimics pretty closely what you're doing with the polynomials in the first place. So this one, a bit harder than the aggregation. The aggregation is really the annoying one, if we're being honest, because you're making a big proof out of like many statements. Randomness in VDS, I'm going in decreasing order of difficulty. We're not that dependent on the VDF for randomness on Tezos. There's also a RANDAO, and the RANDAO was working fine before it had a class group VDF, so that was more of like a cherry on top. And then as part of the protocol as well, we are diminishing the importance of randomness in the protocol. So for example, if you have every validator participate in the consensus as opposed to a random quorum, you don't need as much randomization. If you start replacing, if you start doing block leader selection in a deterministic fashion, you can also replace some of the randomness. So maybe you just fall back to RANDAO. Otherwise, before the nice construction of VDF that we've had with groups, we had some VDF proposals with Starks. They're fairly easy to implement. They're a bit larger. The overhead factor is not as good as they are if you do like the Vizslavskis construction, for example. But they work. So maybe we just go back to just doing a RANDAO. Maybe a Stark verified sequential work. That's generally fine. Smart contract cryptographic primitives. So that one is a bit tougher as well. The sapling circuits, so that's what basically provides Zcash-like functionality. If you want to shield your Tez or any token on a Tezos network, you can use this contract right out of the box. That's a bit tricky because you can't really, this is not a case of like, oh, I'll have a prover and the prover will just compute the big star proof for everyone, like you would have, for example, in a ZK rollup. Here, you need the user to actually submit a Stark. So the user would have to submit a Stark, which is like 100 kilobyte or more if their uses to it could be like 2 megabytes. And then you have to aggregate all that because you can't just put them all on a chain if you want to have any type of throughput. And that poses a question of like, who aggregates it? Does it create centralization? It can be hard to find an actor who's willing to be a centralized actor who's going to aggregate a bunch of proofs for anonymous transactions. There's some lattice-based alternatives, but not that great. Time lock encryption we can do. It's really the private post-quantum signature thing, which is, sorry, the private transaction with post-quantum resistant cryptography is the one that's a bit more annoying out of all the lot. So plausible post-quantum architecture. Here we go. Accounts migrate right now, and then if Falcon matures, go to Falcon. And then we have these different replacements, mostly based on Starks for a lot of the protocol math. Thank you.